Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the park side and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your phones. You can join the conversation tonight online with the hashtag JFK Junior Forum Live and interact with our student-run Instagram at JFK Junior Forum for behind-the-scenes highlights. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming Director of the Institute of Politics, Mark Guerin.
Sure, come on. Thank you, Kezia, and thank you for your leadership on the Forum Committee and all our student leaders. Welcome to the JFK Junior Forum. This is our first forum of the academic year, so we're thrilled to have so many of our students and faculty and staff colleagues and community neighbors here for the start of what will be a really dynamic year of programming right here in the forum. Many of you, I'm sure, noted President Bakow's recent comments as we started the beginning of the year in the Gazette, and I thought they were really on point to the real mission of the Institute of Politics and certainly the JFK Junior Forum in terms of a place for speech and debate and meaningful dialogue. President Bakow said, speaking of our community's commitment to civil discourse, he said, "How can we profess to be seekers of veritas, seekers of truth, if we shame and shun those who disagree with us? How can we urge forbearance and generosity in others if we are unwilling to protect it ourselves? How can we have any hope for the wider world if we cannot model in our community the reasoned debate and discourse we wish to see elsewhere?" And that is what this space is all about, this forum space, dedicated to the free and open and civil exchange of ideas, as we will tonight and throughout the course of the year. As I said, tonight is the beginning of this year's academic year and our beginning of the forum. We'll have a rich array of programming. We're bringing heads of state, leading journalists, academics, activists, and those engaged in the important issues of our time. Important discussions about election 2020, as you would imagine. The opportunity next week with the IOP resident fellows here on this stage. And this year we will initiate a new effort with pop-up forums, meaning quickly organized, responsive to issues of the time, where we tap the expertise of our faculty, experts here at Harvard, our fellows and others to engage in the dialogue. So we warmly welcome you tonight. For those first-year students, welcome to Harvard, welcome to the Institute of Politics. Those returning to Cambridge, welcome back, and we hope that we'll see you early and often here at the Institute of Politics. Tonight, though, we're very fortunate to have Congressman Will Hurd here. He will be in conversation with Professor Juliette Kayyem, and we have brought together two thoughtful conversants in and around the issues of national security and foreign policy. The Congressman's bio is well known to all of you. It's before you in your programs, representing his home born and bred district in Texas. But his commitment to public service brings him to be our inaugural forum speaker tonight, from his service in the CIA to his service in the United States Congress. So we warmly welcome the Congressman here. And we're very fortunate to have Professor Juliette Kayyem here. She is the, I'm going to get this right, the Senior Belfer Lecturer in International Security and the Faculty Chair of Homeland Security and Global Projects. She served in President Obama's administration as a senior official in Homeland Security, and of course is well known to many of us as a CNN national security analyst. So we're grateful to you, Professor, for engaging this conversation. Grateful to you, Congressman, joining us, and welcome all to tonight's forum.
Thank you, Mark. We're getting the volume still right this year. I want to welcome everyone back to the forum, back to the school year. Yes, summer's over, and we are thrilled to have you here because You represent a generation of leadership who has done amazing things in your relatively short career, and we're catching you at a time when you've made the decision to leave Congress. So some of the ground rules here. I'm going to talk with the congressman for about a half hour or 40 minutes. We're going to open up to questions and answers. They should be questions. He'll give answers. We will then adjourn right at 7, so it's pretty easy. So first of all, thank you again.
It's my pleasure. What's up, Harvard? How are y'all?
That really was pathetic, people.
Yeah, I know.
So
I was
like,
this is the first one. Let's try it again.
Just ignore
What's
them.
up,
Let's
Harvard?
just ignore them.
Maybe it's Boston, right? Yeah, yeah. All the freshmen, raise your hands. Okay, let's ignore
wow.
Let's ignore those questions
Yeah,
because they're going to be the hardest ones.
Yeah, they're going to be. They actually still have time to read. They're like still wide-eyed, like well, we welcome you all, and there'll be a series of great events over this semester. I have to say, on a personal level, it's great to have you here. I'm the faculty chair of the Homeland Security Program. Obviously, the way you think about the border and border enforcement and flow across Mexico and the United States is really important, and we're doing a lot of work with Mexico now, I think, in large measure because we see the importance of keeping that relationship as vibrant as we can during a lot of these debates that are going on. So I'm going to do a walk around the world and end up at your house, or not your house literally, but end up in your district. I want to start with your time in the CIA. I was reading about it. So you spent time in Southeast Asia, you spent time in the Middle East, but now looking where we are now, you have said, and many people agree with you, that China actually represents a sort of geopolitical threat of our times. Can you sort of explain why that is for the students, but also how should we be thinking about the Middle East now? Is that a short-term problem, or is it a forever problem? But in particular, what should I be worried about in terms of China?
Well, I think ultimately, and before I get to China, and y'all have my bio, but there's some perspective. I think it's important to understand where I'm coming from. Right? Grew up in San Antonio, born and raised, and went to Texas A&M University. I had never really been outside the state. I'm a freshman walking across campus, and I see a sign that says take 2 journalism classes in Mexico City for $425. I had $450 in my bank account, so I go to Mexico. Right? Fell in love being in another culture, seeing things I read about in books. And my first class I took in international studies, I had a former CIA tough guy tell me the most amazing stories. And that began my interest in the CIA. That began my interest in serving my country. And so 2 years at what I used to call the super secret CIA training facility called the Farm. Now it's on Google Maps. Yeah, I actually wish that was a joke, but it's true. It's on Google Maps. 2 years India, 2 years Pakistan, 2 years New York City doing interagency work, and then 1.5 years in Afghanistan where I managed all of our undercover operations. And as an aside, do you know who my best officers were?
Who?
Anybody have a guess? The women.
Yeah.
Right? You can clap for that, girl.
Except for she's in covert operations, so she really shouldn't have been applauded.
Right. No, and it's a true story. You always hear about James Bond, but you never hear about Michelle Bond. And I'd say that so early in this conversation because a lot of the young women here may not be thinking about a career in intelligence, but my experiences tell me that they're the best ones for our country. And so think about that as you're here at this august university. But when you're in the CIA, and even when you're posted those places, you're always following the big, threats, right? To include China. And why I say that China is an existential threat to the United States of America is because in 2018, there was a bipartisan commission. This was diplomats, generals, academia, CEOs, and they did a study on our national security strategy, and they said that it is no longer guaranteed that the U.S. can maintain economic or military dominance in the world. Why does that matter to us? Because that's going to affect our economy. If our economy is affected, our way of life is affected. And China will surpass the United States as the largest economy, but it doesn't have to surpass the United States as the most important economy. And so this is, we all know they've been stealing our technology for decades. They've been going around international rules for decades. But we can't completely separate from China. I was telling a group of students earlier, we're frenemies.
Yeah.
Our economies are interlinked. And but the way we deal with them is true reciprocity. If a U.S. company or investor can't do it in China, then a Chinese company or investor can't do it in the United States of America. If a U.S. company has to provide its source code to the government of China, then that Chinese company has to do it here in the United States as well. Because there is a capital class within China, and you put pressure on the capital class, you're going to start seeing changes in behavior.
So wouldn't that suggest then that the United States approach to China, or approach to what's happening with China, would be compete where we're good at competing, we're better on a lot of things, and engage the world right now? I mean, is the only way to sort of combat China's growth is actually not to recede, but to essentially get into the ring?
One of the things I learned when I was in the CIA, be nice with nice guys and tough with tough guys. And right now, sometimes our foreign policy exact opposite. Yeah. We're being nice with tough guys and tough with nice guys, with our friends. And so the only way to deal with an existential threat like China is to strengthen our alliances. One of the things that we should do is let's pass USMCA. This is NAFTA 2.0, because we should be talking about North American competitiveness in other parts of the world. We should be talking about how do we change global supply chains and do things in Vietnam, help Japan. We should be negotiating on behalf of our friends. Japan and South Korea are currently in a battle. You can't have that, because those are two important countries to help us deal with China. So I would agree with your premise. We need friends. We need alliances. The United States of America has always shown global leadership. Why does that matter? Because that has what has allowed our economy to grow. We have trading partners, and everybody's looking at us. I spend a lot of time on technology.
So, I mean, to this point on the technology side, so we'll talk about Russia and the election. Do you worry about China sort of seeing what Russia did in 2016 and thinking there's ways we can do that better, we're more sophisticated, we're actually relevant, unlike Russia, which we really don't need in terms of its economy, and we have a capacity, disinformation with the riots going on and all sorts of stuff. What are you seeing in terms of sort of China learning from Russia about ways in which the United States can be destabilized? I'm not talking about hacking the votes, but just destabilized.
Look, every national security leader, when they talk about what happened to our elections in 2016, they've said it's continuing to go on. It happened in 18, or they're trying to do in 18. It's going to happen in 2020, and they always say it's more than just Russia. Let's take a case. Project Maven. Yeah. Project Maven is something. It was a project that a U.S. company, Google, was working with DoD on moving video. Well, this was something that Google ultimately discontinued, and who benefited from that move? The Chinese. You have the largest AI company in the United States of America not cooperating with their Department of Defense. Right? These are things that we should be looking into and exploring. Was there a attempt for disinformation, for that kind of covert action within our society? And unfortunately, our private sector is not prepared to deal with nation-state threats. The United States government is the one that should be dealing with nation-state threats, and we should be working together on this.
And talking about nation-states, and so you've been quite clear about your assessment of Russia's involvement with the 2016 election, and then, of course, what is happening in 2018 and now 2020. There's a political question. I'm just going to ask you directly. Sure. So, as a former CIA agent, you were out in the field trying to protect the United States. If you were out in the field now and you had a bunch of agents working for you, what would you tell them in terms of collecting information that may not be agreed or accepted by the White House on basic facts about an enemy, in this case, Russia, hacking or all the things Russia did in 2016 and then 2020. How do you keep them engaged in protecting the United States? They're out in the field, given the dynamics of the politics right now. And I'm just going to be a president who does not believe Russia is a threat.
I would tell them what I know senior leaders are telling them now. Do your job, right? The reason the men and women that are in our intelligence community, regardless of who the occupant of the White House is, they're putting themselves in harm's way in order to protect this country, and they're going to do that regardless of the occupant of the White House. My career in the CIA started the day of the USS Cole bombing.
Yep.
I was driving my Toyota 4Runner from San Antonio to Washington, D.C., pumping gas, and this is back in the day when there was TV at the gas stations, and we see what happened at the Cole, and I thought, man, am I going to know what happened to that?
Yeah.
2 weeks later, I'm the desk officer for Yemen, right? And then I was in the agency during 9/11, and if you would have told me on September 12th, 2001, that there would not be another major attack like what we saw happen in New York and against the Pentagon, I would have said you were crazy at that time. But the reason that we have gone 18 years without another major attack on our homeland is because the men and women in our diplomatic corps, the men and women in our military, and especially the men and women in our intelligence services are putting themselves in harm's way and still operating as if it's September 11th. So they will continue to do their job. But that's why I've been able to speak out, right? Why does this with Russia matter? I've said that the intelligence community refers to the Russians' attempt to influence our election as Grizzly Steppe, right? Grizzly Steppe is going to go down as the greatest covert action campaign in the history of Mother Russia. Why? Because 4 years later, we're still talking about it, right? And their goal was to erode trust in our democratic institutions. And when you can't trust your institutions, that sows discourse. What are we not talking about? We're not talking about getting the Russians out of eastern Ukraine or getting them out of Crimea. That's why this operation has continued to operate, and they did it for a relatively short, a small amount of money, which is exactly to your point. If I'm China, if I'm Iran, if I'm other entities, I would be thinking about how do you leverage disinformation in order to achieve your end goal. So it's dangerous, and unfortunately, how do you deal with this? Who should be dealing with this? Disinformation is covert action. The entity responsible for covert action, the CIA. The National Security Act of 1947 says the CIA cannot do covert action in the United States of America. And it's really hard to do covert action within English. So who should be responsible for coordinating that? Homeland Security takes up CVE, countering violent extremism. Countering violent extremism is a form of disinformation. So we haven't even been talking about the strategy to deal with this, let alone it's happening.
So, I mean, it's interesting because you brought up terrorism and countering violent extremism. Your state has been sadly the victim of a number of incidents that are involving a different kind of terrorism today. And this is not really a domestic question, because what we're seeing now is obviously the rise of sort of a right-wing terrorism, neo-Nazism, and extremism. It shows itself in the U.S. through guns, because we're the United States, but throughout the globe. I mean, do you think that you could have a sort of countering violent extremism in that regard, to the extent that we know that the Russians are sort of pushing the agenda and they're trying to divide us amongst race and everything else?
Well, we can counter disinformation by nation-state actors because we know who's doing it. We can try to figure out what they're doing. We have an idea of what their goals are. But when it comes to countering white nationalist terrorism, that's even harder. But the tactics, techniques, and procedures you deal with that are the same that we've been using in other areas. The way you stop something from happening is you have to disrupt the attack cycle at some point. And so are we getting the right information in the hands of the right people? Right now, today, if FBI, if a special agent in Boston wanted to search Twitter.com, the public-facing Twitter, and say, is there a bomb in Boston? They can't do that because of a DOJ policy. There is no presumption of privacy there because this is stuff that's publicly available. So why do we not? So that's a very basic thing that we should be able to stop. But right now, the FBI is overwhelmed with the number of leads that they're getting from social media on this issue. So why do we not have algorithms sitting on the social media companies in order to help tip and cue the FBI to go after these things? We see some, I think there's been 5 cases in the last last month, arrests that were disrupted because you got the right information in the right hands in order to stop that. So it's just the volume of data is important, and that's why we have to look to artificial intelligence, machine learning, to help us solve that specific issue.
And I want to get to that because you have worked, you actually, in between the CIA and being a congressman, you worked in cybersecurity in a cyber firm, and you work a lot on the Hill regarding technology. The private sector is a part of this dialogue about what's happening. And so I'm sort of curious, at this stage right now, do you think they are fixable, or do you think we need to legislate in terms of the stuff that they are promoting or allowing to be promoted on their platforms, which have both international, national security implications and homeland security ones?
It depends, right? And I'm glad we were having these conversations with American companies, right? If these were not American companies, then we couldn't be having these conversations. And my fear is we're going to need, if the government believes they can defend digital infrastructure by ourselves, or if the private sector thinks that they can defend digital infrastructure by themselves, that's the equivalent of the French thinking the Maginot Line is going to defend them from the Germans, right? So we have to work together, and you have to have this level of operational collaboration to solve these problems. And yes, could there be some more things that social media companies are doing? Yes. Is there more sharing that should happen within the federal government? Absolutely. Why is it so hard to get a security clearance for an individual that's involved in the private sector that can help chase bad guys down or do this level of cooperation? So the basics, though, and I think Congress is going to get forced to deal with this, is a national breach law. This means, right now there's 47 different laws that say if your information gets stolen, what happens, right? There should be a federal law. This is going to get forced because California and I believe Washington State are trying to force this, but this is a conversation at a basic level that Congress should be working on.
And just to explain to the audience, what exactly would that do? If there is a breach, a duty to disclose.
If there's a breach, then and somebody was negligent, there's going to be a fine, or you have to let somebody know, excuse me, if their information was breached by in this X number of hours or days, right, in order to ultimately notify them. Look, by end of next year, there's going to be 40 million connected devices, right? The surface of area of attack is only going to increase, and we shouldn't be afraid of technology, right? But we should be taking advantage of technology before it takes advantage of us. And the only way we're going to do this is if we're actually collaborating.
So you can learn a lot about a congressman or woman, but a congressman by his district. So tell us a little bit about your district, because it is one unique one.
29 counties, 2 time zones. 820 miles of the border. It takes 10 and a half hours to drive across the district at 80 miles an hour, which is actually the speed limit. In
He
the
knows
district.
people.
Yeah, no, but look,
get stopped.
no, it's legitimately the speed limit in most of the district. But I found out 2 weeks ago it's not the speed limit in all of the districts. And it's 71% Latino. You have San Antonio, which is 50% of the district, 7th largest city in the country, cybersecurity city USA. And then you have Mentone, a population in the entire county. Mentone's the city of this county. The entire county, 95 people. I've met 72 of them, and I'm in my final 14 months. I'm going to try to find the final 23. And so every issue imaginable is there. Obviously, border security is important. Trade with Mexico is important, and it's my hometown. And it's one of the few. There are only 3 Republicans in districts that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. The 23rd Texas is one of those. And on the flip side, right now, there's 31 Democrats in seats that Donald Trump won. So the 23rd is really one of the original 50-50 districts that could swing either way.
The wall. You've been very critical of the. We were going to get there. It's funny.
Yeah.
You've been very critical of the wall, or the notion of the wall, and I think for people, I've spent a lot of time at the borders, but I think for people who've never been there, they can't quite conceptualize either why it's good or bad. So on an average day, how many people in your district are, average week, I'll give it a week, do you think going to Mexico or back? How much commercial activity? In other words, the wall would essentially end your district, economically.
Yeah, so I think the stat is like $1 million a second.
Yeah.
Goes back and forth across the border, and I think that number is just for the 23rd. Building a 30-foot high concrete structure from sea to shining sea is the most expensive and least effective way to do border security. There are parts of the district where Border Patrol's response time is measured in hours to days.
Yeah.
If the response time to a threat is measured in hours to days, a wall is not a physical barrier. That's why we need a smart wall. Let's use technology. We should have operational control of the border, meaning we should know everything that's going back and forth across our border. Right. It is a crisis what's going on right now. When you look at the amount of drugs that are coming in to our country illegally, I think it's conservative estimates about $35 billion with a B. That's more than all the lattes sold at Starbucks and all the Big Macs sold at McDonald's, right? And the humanitarian crisis we're dealing with illegal immigration that's coming in is significant. But you don't have enough people in Border Patrol. You would think we would have the latest and greatest technology along the border, but some of this stuff is 20 years old, right? And then we also need to address the root causes, which is violence, lack of economic opportunity, and extreme poverty in the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. That's what's driving a lot of the illegal immigration that's coming here, and that's why I think we should have a special representative, a senior diplomat, for the Northern Triangle to coordinate all of our activities with that region. But the border, every mile of the border is different from every other mile, and if there's a good movie out called The River and the Wall. Now I happen to be in it, but my parts are very, very engaging. But it really gives you a bird's eye view of what it looks like, the expanse, right? So when General Kelly was head of, when he was
Southern Command?
When he was Secretary of Homeland Security, I was on Homeland Security Committee. He comes in front, and I have a big picture of Santa Elena Canyon, 6,000-foot cliff on one side, the Rio Grande, 6,000-foot cliff on the other side. I showed him that picture. I said, Mr. Secretary, is that already a physical barrier? He's like, yes, that's already a physical barrier. Would we need a wall there? No. Then I show him Lake Amistad. It's a lake that borders the U.S. and Mexico. Mr. Secretary, if we built a wall in there, wouldn't that be a dam? You know, and he goes, yes, Congressman, yes, right. Congressman, that's correct. Do we need a dam there? He's like, no. And so in some places, a physical barrier is a deterrent because response time is measured in seconds to minutes, right? But in others,
right, because the delay, if you can stop someone for 2 minutes because there's a wall, then the agent comes in.
Yeah. And by the way, $24.5 million a mile for a physical wall.
Right.
Smart wall, $500,000. And for those of y'all that are not in accounting, that's a difference of $24 million, right?
Yeah.
Like a mile. So it's wild.
It's a sort of, it's become something more than just the physical barrier.
Sure.
But one of the things about border enforcement, not just the wall, is this sense that the numbers are increasing, that there is a migration pattern that we cannot stop right now unless we, as you say, sort of invest in particular countries or whatever. But one of the things I think animates immigration policy right now is a sense that, you know, the wall combined with harsh measures here, you know, family separation, horrible detention conditions, will impact the flow of people from the South. And we haven't seen those numbers. You're kind of smiling, but I mean, it's just sort of, why is it, I mean, at some stage you would think, why are people still coming?
They're still coming because the environments in which they're living are so terrible that a mother or a father is saying, you know what? The only way to make sure my kid has a better life is to go on this harrowing 3,000-mile journey. And if the United States of America snatches children out of their mother's arms as a policy, we need to rethink that.
Yeah.
And so to me, guess what? Streamline legal immigration. Hello, we have benefited from the brain drain of every other country for the last couple of decades. I want to continue that. Let's benefit from the hard-working drain as well. If you're going to contribute to our economy, let's get you here as much as possible. If there's anybody, Mark, in this room that is not from the United States and they graduate from Harvard, I want to slip a visa in your tube so that you stay here, right? Build a company here, right? Like that. So you address legal immigration. Oh, and by the way, at 3.6% unemployment, what does that mean? That means you need workers in every industry, whether it's agriculture or artificial intelligence. And DACA, come on, 1.2 million kids.
2 years ago today.
Yeah. Right. 1.2 million kids that have only known the United States of America as their home. Come on, that's an easy one.
So you don't sound like what we hear from the party. So I want to talk about your decision. I'm subtle.
Why is that? This is when everybody laughs?
Yeah,
you know?
I am. That's not the Republican talking points.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk in the last couple minutes about your decision to leave and to use some of your quotes. So your decision to leave Congress is not your bye, you'll never see me again. It is to sort of figure out a way in which you can rebuild the Republican Party in a way, and I think I have the quote right, that it looks more like you, or my favorite quote of yours, and I'm sure everyone redoes it to you, which is, it's real simple. Don't be an asshole. Don't be a racist. Don't be a misogynist. And don't be a homophobe. Am I allowed to say that?
Did I say that?
Live streaming. So the way you talk about your vision of the Republican Party is not where the Republican Party is. You have said that the people who run for office are different than the party that you believe in. Or let me put it without a but, if when you leave, how can you change a party that you say is shrinking and is not being all the things that you said?
Teach candidates how to do what I've done. It's that simple. So I've told my friends in Texas, if the Republican Party in Texas doesn't start looking like Texas, there won't be a Republican Party in Texas, right? And so the two largest growing groups of voters, minorities and young people, our brand isn't that great in those two categories. Ronald Reagan in 80, in 84, and George H.W. Bush in 88 won the under 29 vote by 30 points. When I read this, I thought it was wrong. I fact-checked it. I thought they meant to say they got 30% of the vote. No, they won it by 30 points. So I want to go and help Republicans in primaries, primaries. Let's make sure we get a good Republican coming out of that primary. And I believe that the country is better off when we have a competition of ideas in November, when the general election is, not during primaries. And unfortunately, it's something crazy like 85% of the members of Congress come from a district that is super Democrat or super Republican. That doesn't help that doesn't help, lead towards debate that's going to solve problems. And here's what I've learned representing a district that's truly 50-50.
And I should interrupt. I think every time you ran, you sort of won by maybe 10,600 votes.
10,000 would have been like a runaway, right?
I think the first time.
The most, I think I won by 3,000 was
3,000.
like the most.
So the most recently was
921.
Yeah, 900.
But it's 920 more votes than I needed,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I'll take it.
He does math
right?
well.
I'm very
Yeah.
efficient. I'm very
Yeah.
efficient.
Yeah.
And so look, this stuff isn't rocket science,
Right.
and way more unites us than divides us. But unfortunately, the way you win elections is by creating contrast.
Right.
And if you win an election by creating contrast, what do you always do? Create contrast. And so there's so much that we actually agree on. And if we focus on those things and solving problems, then when it comes time for an election, you can say, here's my laundry list of things that I did. That's how I've operated. That's how we've been successful. And at no point in my career did anybody think I was going to win in any of my elections, right? And so we continue to disprove by being different, by reaching out to everybody. There's a town called Eagle Pass on the border, 89% Latino, 95% Democrat. I went down there the first time to a tardeada. It's an afternoon party, and 700 people there. The band had 3 elected officials. I walk in, they stopped. I had 212 people come up and ask me a version of this question. And I know it was 212 because the person with me counted. Why are you here? Now, the professional political class, the people that run races, do all this stuff, they would say, talk about macroeconomic theory of this. Yeah. My response was, because I like to drink beer and eat barbecue too. Right? The next time I showed up, people would shake my hand. Third time I showed up, people would walk by and be like, I'm a Republican. Right? Fourth time I showed up, people would tell me a problem. Fifth time I showed up, I solved that problem. And that's why I continue to increase my margin of victory in those places. Show up, treat people with respect, be honest, tell people what you're doing, why you're doing it. All those things we learned in kindergarten that I think we've forgotten.
So I'm a constituent of yours, and I have voted for you. This is fiction. And,
I was like, I didn't know that.
And I'm looking at the country right now, and the divisiveness and the sense that most Republicans do not talk like you, nor does the President of the United States. In 2020, how should I vote?
Well, if I was still on the ballot, I'd say vote for Will Hurd, right?
That's easy.
And look,
I mean, in other words, is it correctable with the present leadership? I mean, in other words, are you, by you leaving, you're, for better or for worse, say, well, the present leadership is not thinking like I'm thinking, so I'm going to come from the outside. If I'm voting, and I'm the ideal voter for you, I'm not the hardcore Republican, I'm not a hardcore Democrat, I like you and you drink beer or whatever. Tell me how to think about 2020.
Well, the way you think about 2020 is how are you going to solve problems in the future? And to me, that's by empowering people, not empowering the government, right? How do you help people move up the economic ladder? You help them move up the economic ladder through free markets, not socialism. You don't take away free markets. We need more free marketry, right? And the third piece, and I already said, how do we achieve and maintain peace? Be nice with nice guys, tough with tough guys. Now, there's a lot of other folks. Yes, the president is the titular head of the party. But I've always said, the president's not my boss. The Speaker of the House is not my boss. Whoever the head of the party is not my boss. My boss are those 800,000 people that I ultimately represent.
Yeah, but let me be more direct. Is the Republican Party you envision achievable with Donald Trump as president?
Yes, because you have Elise Stefanik, you have John Katko, you have John Cornyn, you have Wesley Hunt in Houston, right? There's a lot of Nicole Malliotakis out of New York City, right? You have a lot of really interesting, great people that are working hard on behalf of this country, and everybody should want two strong parties to have that competition of ideas. Even if you don't vote, you should want to make sure that we have these debates, because there are generational defining challenges that we have to deal with. And the only way we're going to deal with those problems is by solving those issues together. And way more unites us, and I'll say this 100 times, than divides us, and we need to be focusing on that.
So, wow.
Yeah.
That was fun. I do have to do Q&A.
Sure,
So let me
sure.
ask the last question. So we're here at a university where students see the divisiveness, both sides of the aisle. One of the challenges of me as a faculty member is sort of, should they get into the scrum? That's kind of hard, right? I mean, it looks mean and tough and icky and, why don't I just go make a lot of money or whatever? Give them the best advice on doing public service and serving government, even with all of this noise right now.
If y'all don't solve the problems, who will? Right? There is a lot of the public service. You get a reward that you cannot find anywhere else. The ability to impact one person, or the ability to impact thousands of people. The ability to be in a back alley in Pakistan collecting a piece of information that is going to stop an attack happening on our homeland, or being in the Peace Corps or the Diplomatic Corps and helping address extreme poverty in some of these areas so a mom and a dad doesn't have to send their child on a perilous journey, right? Being down in Washington, D.C. and helping to be involved in this competition of ideas and serving your district or serving your state. There's a reward to this, right, that you will not find in other places. I've been in the private sector. You just don't get it. And guess what? If y'all don't do it, who is?
Look who does.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Right.
That was
Thank
terrific. Okay, so a lot of you are new. That was just wonderful. And if I were your constituent, I might vote for you. I'm joking.
I'll take it.
So the way the Q&A works, we have 4 microphones here. The lighting's horrible for me. Please introduce yourself. Please make the question short and a question. So I'm going to start with you.
Hi. Thank you so much for this presentation, Congressman, and also Professor Kayyem. I'm an Australian Foreign Service officer, and I've just served in Hong Kong, where, of course, you see the microcosm of, I think, the tensions of China and the rest of the West playing out. So I wanted to hear your views on that, just very short, because I think if West doesn't actually intervene or sort of comment on what's going on in the protest, and I think that we're failing to uphold democratic values.
I agree with you 100%. I think we need to be helping, this is where strengthening our alliance with Australia, with Japan, with other folks, and we have to make sure that we're honoring the commitment that we were forcing the Chinese to honor the commitment they did when they signed the agreement to allow, freedoms in Hong Kong for, 100 years or something like that. And so we should be standing up and being a little bit more vocal and have the backs of the folks in Hong Kong. I hope that we're going to get a CODEL to go into Hong Kong and be there with folks. I wouldn't mind being down there in the protests, and throwing some, stuff at people. I was a joke. I will not be throwing anything. I do not support throwing things at people. But look,
he said he was very careful. I said we're going to have fun. I'm very careful.
So no, look, support your friends, right? Because guess what? If we don't do this in Hong Kong, what's going to happen in Taiwan? What's going to happen? We have an opportunity with Vietnam to have Vietnam come into our orbit. Why would they do that if they don't think that you're going to support people that you should be supporting? And we shouldn't be making some of the same mistakes that we've made in previous countries. The Green Revolution in Iran. A simple standing up and saying, I support this, this movement, could have been the thing that pushed that country over the edge, right? Support, be nice with nice guys, tough with tough guys. Hong Kong's the nice guys. China's the tough guys. And again, I think we should ratchet up potential sanctions on China. I think that's something we should be thinking of.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Trey Layton, and I'm actually from Kerrville, Texas.
Oh, right
so,
on.
Yes, sir. And I'm a freshman at the college, and I guess I was just wondering kind of what motivated you to, I guess, get into politics, and whether those same things kept you motivated when you kind of went and voted against typical party stances.
Sure. I got involved because, my job as a case officer in the CIA, I was a dude in the back alleys at 4 o'clock in the morning collecting intelligence on threats to the homeland, right? In addition to doing that, I had to brief members of Congress on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which I now serve on. I was shocked by the caliber of our elected officials, right? I had a senior member of HIPSI, he asked a question, this is 2008, why was Iran not supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan the way Iran was supporting other groups in Iraq? Mediocre question. But I started explaining the Sunni-Shia divide. And this congressman raises his hand, he goes, Will, what's the difference between a Sunni and a Shia? And I'm thinking he's going to make a really inappropriate joke, and who am I to deny him this opportunity? And I said, I don't know, Congressman, what's the difference? And I'm getting ready to go, bum, right? His face goes bright red, didn't know that difference in Islam. I knew some friends that had run races, and they had suggested I run, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. And in essence, I got pissed and left Afghanistan, moved to Helotes, and ran for Congress. Lost that first election. Glad I don't tell that story anymore. But it was a way, I thought I was going to be able to serve the intelligence community in a different way. I thought I'd be able to serve my country in a different way. And I've been able to do the things that I've done because, again, do the right thing and tell people what you're doing and why you're doing it. Don't just go along because somebody says you should. And know your constituents. And I continued to be able to do those things because you can really help people. A lot of times in Congress, you only hear about the legislation, but you can help individual people in a way that changes their lives forever.
Thank you.
My name is Jeremiah Kim. I'm also a first year. So you touched on Russian interference in our election. What do you believe the consequences for election interference should be?
Is it an act of war? This is a debate we should be having, right? Because if someone were to come in and let's say a Russian, SVR officer was in the election administrator's office of Bexar County, where San Antonio is, and they were trying to monkey with a computer, what would happen in that case? It would definitely be a diplomatic incident, but there should be consequences. What those consequences are, we need to have a debate on this. And this is a broader question of what is a digital act of war, right? I know if North Korea launched a missile into San Francisco, I know what our response would be. The North Koreans know what their response would be, right? That serves as a deterrence. What is that in a digital space? What is that when it comes to disinformation? I don't know exactly, but it should be a conversation, and there should be consequences.
Over here.
Thank you for being here. My name is Luke Gallagher. I'm a sophomore here at the college. Question on a similar note. Are you afraid of the consequences of Americans that have already begun or are going to begin to lose faith in the integrity of our elections due to a continued threat, as well as inaction in what feels like the Senate, and frankly, a failure to acknowledge the problem by the president?
Well, I would say this. I think so the House has passed. So I held the first hearing on election interference before the 2016 election. I was calling for Ambassador Kislyak, the Russian ambassador at the time, to at a minimum be kicked out of the country because of the activities that we knew the Russians were doing there. And I said at the time, the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, was spending millions of dollars trying to defeat me. But an attack on them is an attack on all of us, right? And so ultimately, we've passed a number of bills to strengthen and provide more money to Department of Homeland Security. Jay Johnson declared election infrastructure as a critical infrastructure. Now, all the states got upset at the time, but then months later, they're like, oh, yeah, that was the right move. right? That was the right move. And so I think we'll see the Senate pass some of this legislation that we've already seen pass out of the House. It has to go through their process. But yeah, you're always concerned when you don't have people voting or giving people one more reason not to vote. And so we should be concerned because this is so critical to our democracy. And it's not just what's happening here. It's happening in Moldova. It's happening in Estonia. It's happening all over the world. And these are our allies and people that look up to us, and we need to make sure our democracy is strong. So we'll continue to work on that.
Can I just follow up on that? Just because somebody said, I mean, you sit on the House Permanent Intelligence Committee. I mean, do you think the president, for a variety of reasons, welcomes the interference or is just denying it? Like, I mean, is there a difference between those two? But this is the point you're raising, which is, given that it's an existential threat to our democracy, why should we have confidence that we're going to be okay in 2020?
So I don't think he wants it. I think it's a question of does that put an asterisk on the validity of the 2016 election? And even everybody under the Obama administration said that, yes, there were attempts to try to influence our election, but that did not change the vote counting, right? There was not a ballot change or a number change. So the election was absolutely valid. But I can tell you this, that every agency within the intelligence space is focused on this problem, working to solve this problem, and they're working together at a level that I haven't seen on a particular issue like that. So the people that you need working on this problem are focused on this problem, working on this problem. They have consistent interagency work groups that are addressing this.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. My name's Connor. I'm also a first year here at the college. And, excuse me, I thought it was very interesting that you chose to bring up Project Maven, and specifically the potential of nation-state level disinformation surrounding that idea, that project. However, many would argue that one of the real sources of misinformation regarding that project was instead domestic markets. It was Google, for example, that repeatedly lied to its own employees about the scale of the project, saying it was a trivial $9 million contract when it was hundreds of millions of dollars, or that it was basic image recognition when it was, surveilling entire cities. If you believe in greater collaboration between the private sector and the military sector, do you foresee greater regulations surrounding things like transparency and openness as a necessary prerequisite to avoid those sorts of problems?
100%. You have to have that transparency in order to make sure everybody's comfortable with what's being done. And I want a democratic-leaning ethics to influence how these technologies are developed. Should a robot be able to kill a robot? Should a robot be able to kill a human? Where in that decision space should a human be? Right? These are some of the questions that we're having to grapple with, and I think transparency is one of them. It's because of the bias within the algorithms, and that bias is decided by how you train the algorithm. So we need to know what kind of training data is going in order to make these decisions. I say all the time, China is not developing facial recognition in order to make it easier to buy groceries in the grocery store. Okay? They're using it to continue their human rights abuses against the Falun Gong, against the Uyghurs, against their broader population. And so when we don't show the right ethics when it comes to this stuff, then nobody else will, and this is a race. We all know what Vladimir Putin said, whoever masters AI masters the world. And this is why I think a key principle of this is transparency.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. My name's Constanza Castro, and I'm an MPP1. So my question is regarding U.S. diplomacy. More specifically, whether Trump wins the 2020 election or not, how do you recommend U.S. diplomats repair fractured relationships with key U.S. strategic allies?
Look, it is the job of a diplomat to promote U.S. policy, right? And this is something that's decided by the White House. Now, I actually believe since probably Bill Clinton that diplomacy has been focused and centered within the White House, and I think that should be pushed further and let the ambassadors, let our senior foreign policy officials conduct that policy based on their understanding of the keys on the ground. I was in South Asia in 2003 when we invaded Iraq. It was not a popular time to be a diplomat in that part of the world. Now, what's going to happen in 2020? I go back to Texas. Texas is purple. Just because we don't have a statewide elected official that's a Democrat doesn't mean it's not in play. And when you look at what happened in the last election in 2018, Ted Cruz only beat Beto O'Rourke by 3 percentage points. Beto had $40 million more than Ted Cruz, and Ted outspent him the last 3 weeks of the campaign on all media markets in Texas. That's 3 percentage points right there. Governor Abbott, in his previous election, beat the opponent that had $40 million by 22 points. This last person he ran against, she only had $1.5 million, and he only won by 9 percentage points. That's why if we're not doing more to appeal to minorities and young people, then we're going to have problems. And guess what? You can't do it 4 months before the election. That's called pandering. You got to be doing it. You got to be doing that now. And so I would say 2020 is going to be interesting, but there's also an opportunity for Republicans to win because of this concern about free markets.
Up there.
Hello, Derek Label, MPP1. In line with your concern about free markets, our intelligence agencies and our military assess that climate change is a national security threat, but it's one that's largely driven by the current structure of the free markets that we have. So how can the Republican Party respond to this national security challenge in line with this free market principle?
Well, first, admit that humans are having an impact on the environment, right? Like that's not that's something as simple that you do there. Deforestation. If we prevented deforestation, it would actually take a third of the carbon out of the air that we need to, right? And so instead of not doing anything when it comes to the fires that we're seeing down in the Amazon, we should be doing something about that. So these are basic conservative principles. When you look at Teddy Roosevelt and how he believed in conservation, he wanted to make sure that we kept these things but also allowed commerce to continue. These aren't mutually exclusive ideas. We need smart people involved. I think technology has a role to play, but we need to recognize the problem first. That goes a long way in order to ultimately solve it. And I firmly believe that we have to stop thinking that nature is a destination. It's actually our home, and do something about it.
Thank you.
Up there.
Good evening, Congressman. Thank you so much for your remarks.
Sure.
My name is William Greenlaw. I'm a first-year student at Harvard Law School. I would like to talk a bit about your career. As one of the few people in Congress that I know of with experience in the CIA, you're a unique asset in forming our House of Representatives. In the beginning, how did you balance informing your colleagues and credentializing yourself to the people who not are all on the Select Intelligence Committee, while also keeping your history secret?
So I had to go through a pretty rigorous process to make sure I was able to talk about my background and experience. It's very clear what I can and can't talk about, right? The line is very thick and very black, and I don't even get close to it. And so I know what I can say, and so technically it's not a problem, it's not a challenge. What I found interesting when I first got to Congress is that my colleagues appreciated that background and came to me and asked a lot of questions. And so these are senior people that have been there for decades, coming to a freshman, and asking questions about issues we were dealing with. So that's people from both sides of the aisle. So that transition wasn't that hard. The hardest thing for me was saying the 3 letters. Because my entire career, for 9.5 years, I maybe said those 3 letters a couple of dozen times. And I remember when I decided to run, I sent an email out to like 15,000 of my closest friends. And I was like, I'm running for Congress. Oh, and by the way, I was in the CIA. And and I had lunch with a buddy of mine, and he goes, Hurd, how was the farm? And he used the true name of the farm.
Yeah.
And I'm aghast. I'm like, how do you know that? And he goes, know what? I was like, the true name of the farm. He's like, it's in every book, So that was the hardest transition for me.
I think we have time for maybe 2 more. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Congressman. I'm Ryan Galemi. I'm a first year at school, and I just wanted to ask a question about China. Increasingly, they've been using kind of their soft power to bully other people internationally, like Confucius Institutes, where they've been getting to colleges and forcing them to make demands, or with some Uyghur minorities who have fled the camps, they've been trying to kind of use international pressure on them. And you talked earlier about reciprocity, but I'm not exactly sure how for situations like that, where they're not dealing with companies, the United States could do anything. So do you think there's anything the United States can do to combat this thing where China's increasingly using kind of soft power means to kind of bully its citizens internationally?
No, it's not just bullying their own citizens. They're using a debt trap in some other countries in order to get them to finance projects that they know they're never going to be able to do, so they can go in and take a port. We've seen that happen in Sri Lanka. What's probably going to happen in Nicaragua, I think, is when they had an issue. So what we should be doing is countering that with our own economic soft power. In national security, they talk about the 4 levers of national power, and it's called DIME: diplomacy, intelligence, military, and economic. Oftentimes, we leave the economic piece on the side. I think it's one of the most important ones, and that we should be leading with that in other countries. But when it comes to things like the Confucius Institute happening here, when we see that stuff happening, we should kick those people out of the country.
I am afraid we're going to have time for only one more.
Hello, Congressman. My name is Aristotle Vainikos. I'm a first year over at the college, and you said a lot about being nice to nice guys and tough to tough guys. I have a question regarding what you think the approach should be to foreign entities that are more ambiguous in their aggression. So, for instance, last year, Saudi Arabia was there were a lot of questions regarding whether they were doing something legal or not with Jamal Khashoggi and other issues out there. What should the U.S. stance be in terms of foreign policy to those more ambiguous aggressors?
Make sure our foreign policy match our ideals as a nation, right? And you have to start there, then you're going to figure out what the specific instance is. Listen to your folks on the ground, and we can deal with a human rights issue, but also continue to cooperate militarily against a common foe. You can do both at the same time. It's hard, but it starts with, and I think the broader question there was, are we giving up our who we are as a nation in order for some short-term benefit? And I don't think you should do that. Do I have time to end with a quick story?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
I'll end with this quick story. And thanks for everybody coming here. When you're in the CIA and you're going to meet someone who's giving you secrets, you have to do a SDR, surveillance detection route. And I'm in a city overseas I'd never been in before. And I'm getting ready to turn down an alley, which I thought was going to be abandoned. But when I turned down it, it was like a parade. A couple thousand people. I'm in a Toyota Tercel, small vehicle, going about 4 miles an hour. And a woman walks in front of my car. I mash on my brake, roll over her flip-flop, drag her foot across the concrete, bust her toe wide open, right? Meat's hanging out, it's nasty. She looks in the car, realizes I'm not from around there, and starts screaming bloody murder. I have people banging on my car, shaking my car. And standard operating procedure in this situation, get off the X. The X is the place you don't want to be when something's going down, right? And but I couldn't get that far. I had a weapon, but not enough ammunition for this situation, so I did what they least expected. I get out of the car. I unfold my 6'4" frame out of this car, and I said, "Does anybody speak English?" This little kid, part of this crowd, I'll remember his face the rest of my life. He said, raised his finger in the air and said, "I speak the English." And I said, "Sir, where's the closest hospital?" He figured it out. I said, "Fetch me a rickshaw." Rickshaw, scooter with a little carriage. And I take some money in my pocket, give it to the woman. She gets in the rickshaw. And I said, "Take her to a hospital." They drive away. My translator got in the rickshaw as well. And the crowd literally starts clapping. They start patting me on the back. Some guy literally opened my car door, right? And I get in. And I start driving away. And I look in the rearview mirror. And everybody's waving, right? And my heart is beating because I thought my mother was going to get a phone call that no mother ever wants to get. Now, this is a fun story to tell today because I started my day in San Antonio with breakfast tacos. I had some barbecue in St. Louis at the airport. I'm on my 3rd vanilla latte. But I tell this story because there are thousands of men and women every single day and every single night putting themselves in harm's way in order for us to continue our way of life that we've enjoyed for over 200 years, right? It is a calling. It is something that every one of y'all that are in school here can potentially participate in, and it's something that I think y'all think about as you go through your career here, because we need more young men and women that are willing to step up and solve the problem. And since we are at the JFK School, I will end with a JFK quote, right, that I love. We in this generation, in this nation, are by the watchmen to the walls of world freedom. That we ask that we can exercise our strength with wisdom and restraint, and that we may achieve in our time and for all time the ancient vision of peace on earth and goodwill towards man. The righteousness of our cause must always underlie our strength. Y'all have the opportunity to do that. It's been wonderful being with y'all. God bless you, and may God continue to bless these United States of America.
I'm gonna thank you.
Yeah.
I was thinking about your decision to leave Congress and the line, we can't miss you if you don't go. And in some ways, when you leave Congress and try to change the Republican Party, it will realize it misses you. So we wish you good luck, and thank you very much to all of you for coming, but most importantly to you and the hour you spent with us today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.